Hello and welcome to THINKpod, powered by the FII Institute. For more than 30 years, I led Sky News' coverage of global events, holding to account the politicians and change makers shaping the world of today. In this series, filmed at the 6th Future Investment Initiative in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, I've got the opportunity to question those shaping the future. At this inflection point in our history, how can we ensure that the future is one of prosperity and opportunity for all? This episode, I'm joined by GV Ravishankar, the Managing Director of Sequoia India. India's venture capital sector has matured in recent decades. The country now boasts over 100 unicorns.
Yes, there is the financial aspect to it, but we think we are actually creating a lot of jobs and creating impact.
So what can be learnt from the ambitious founders driving India towards superpower status? Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you for having me on this podcast. My name is GV Ravishankar. I'm a partner at Sequoia Capital. I represent the India and Southeast Asia business at Sequoia. And more recently, we've expanded into the Middle East, where we made a few investments. So I live and work out of Dubai. I manage that part of the business as well as lead the growth investing efforts at Sequoia in the region.
And Sequoia, obviously a very big investment fund. So how independent are you of the American parent?
So we have a philosophy that we want locals to invest, or people that are closest to the region to invest in a region. So we are a fairly kind of distributed setup. So we have a team that's focused on US, we have a team that's focused on Europe, we have a separate team focused on China, we have a team that's focused on India and Southeast Asia with offices in 3 cities in India and in Singapore, and most recently in Dubai. So our belief is that people that invest should be very close to the markets. They shouldn't be flying in and investing. So because of that, we're structured as a kind of a loose federate, if you will, but with a very common fabric in terms of culture and how we approach investing.
And before that, you were at McKinsey.
That's right.
Is it better doing it for real than being a consultant?
That's a great question. No, look, I wasn't there long enough, and now I've been at Sequoia almost for 17 years. So this has been life. Yeah, it's very different when you're kind of putting money where your conviction is and kind of following it through over 7-10 year period when you're partners with a company. So it's not like you make a decision and you run away from it. You got to live that decision, and it's a very different experience doing that. And it's also a great learning experience because you get to see the decisions, the assumptions you made at the time of the investment, and how things eventually panned out, and you're constantly learning from that experience. So it's,
And in Sequoia in India, I mean, what's your philosophy in your investment?
Well, very, very long-term in our thinking. We want to pick businesses that can be enduring long-term businesses. Our business works with this concept of a power law, which is very few things will matter. Few investments will give you most of the returns and most of the profits. So our business is not about not making mistakes. Our business is about not missing the really big ones, right? So we have to be in the most defining companies of every decade that comes about. And so it's about taking that risk, backing those not unconventional founders who are going there to change the world in some form, and being a pillar of support for them and being a true partner in the sense that it's not just capital, but what can we do with them and for them over a period of an investment, which is usually, typically 8 or 10 years. And our funds are structured as 10 plus 2 12-year funds. But thanks to our LP base who have been, supportive of us for the last 50 years, and Sequoia completes 50 years this year, we've got the ability to stay with the founder for a very long period of time.
I mean, this is an investment conference with the theme of humanity, and some people would sort of see those almost in contradiction.
Well, we don't see it that way, especially coming from a developing country like India, where much of progress is linked to kind of creating the jobs, creating the opportunity for people to both make money. And for us, somewhat capitalism has come much later than maybe it came to the West. And so a lot of development is happening around the startup ecosystem, and including the Prime Minister. Everybody's keen to see how to build a more startup friendly nation. There is just so many problems to solve in a developing country. Like we don't have the basic infrastructure in many things, and a lot of things have been done thanks to startups that come, whether it's e-commerce, who built out the infrastructure for delivery or logistics and so on and so forth, which didn't really exist before. So there's a significant impact on, human life. Yes, there is a financial aspect to it, but we think we are actually creating a lot of jobs and creating impact.
I mean, there's been a big boom in investment in India. Where's that money coming from?
Much of the capital that comes into India comes from the Western markets and sometimes from markets like the Middle East. Our investors are mostly foundations. They are university endowments and not-for-profit foundations. So in a way, we think of ourselves as kind of doing something for good causes with people that, eventually the returns also go into good causes.
And do you work with the sovereign wealth funds at all?
Some of them we do, yes.
And you said you want to catch the big ones, the stories of the decade. What are the big ones right now?
Well, it changes every decade. But in India at least, there are a bunch of companies that are building out payment infrastructure, for example. So we are investors in a company called Pine Labs, which is enabling payments at retail counters and so on. We are investors in an online payment company called Razorpay, which is like the Stripe of the US or of the Western markets. That's an example. We are investors in large education technology companies. We are investors in large direct-to-consumer brands that are coming up fresh and new. We invest in some of the largest financial services companies, which are non-banks. The banks are regulated, and that's a different business. The non-banks, which are focused on financial inclusion, we invested in some of the large ones there. So some of those we think of as potentially enduring businesses. Now, not every business will end up being enduring, but we think some of these have a real chance of being enduring businesses.
And they are, to a certain extent, they're startups, aren't they? I mean, they're aiming at facilitating the lives of
That's right.
ordinary people rather than the big movements.
Yeah, 100%. So, in India, at least, what we see is that much of the population is below the middle class, segments, right? So there's a huge amount of population there, and the biggest companies end up servicing the demand of those. So while there are significant profit pools in the top end of the market, but there are only fewer people at the top, and there's a lot more people in the middle and lower middle. So companies that are focused on the large segment of the population, which works on bringing them, inclusion in terms of financial services or other things, end up becoming large dominant businesses. Right?
How much of this depends on, the internet, people being online?
Yeah, I think a significant portion has become, right? In India, and to just give you an example, when I started investing in India, just 2006, we probably had less than 30 million internet users, and India had a GDP per capita of maybe $750, $800, something like that. Today, we have maybe 800 million internet users. Much of this has happened because of mobile phone penetration and smartphone penetration, right? So that's really changed everything. India also has amongst the lowest data costs anywhere in the world, certainly much cheaper than this part of the world. And that's really enabled a lot of people to come online and access services that otherwise they were not getting access to. So if you are living in a tier 4, tier 5 city in India, earlier you didn't have access to products and services that were available in the larger cities and towns. And today, thanks to internet, you have a platform and a distribution channel that allows you to access products and services sitting wherever you're sitting across the country. And this has been a significant enabler of kind of commerce and financial services inclusion into deepest parts of India.
Do you think India's going to reach saturation, basically that everyone can get access?
Yeah, I mean, you would at some point reach saturation, but the reality is that the kind of services that they're consuming today are so basic, and there's just so much to be done, right? Like a lot of services that are available in the bigger towns and cities, and for people that are well endowed, are not yet available in a certain format for the people that are coming up and the risers and so on. There's just so many industries that still need to be built of scale in India.
And what about social issues of literacy, women's rights, those kind of things?
Emerging topics. Literacy has been a focus. Like India's, in India, most people believe in education as a route to success. Sure. So if you think about my life and how I came up, it is all about education. A lot of focus of Indian parent is on education. They're willing to spend disproportionate to their income on education, enabling people to kind of get away from poverty or the lower middle class into the upper middle class by being qualified to get into the right jobs and so on. So literacy is a pretty big theme, and it's only improving now. If you look at platforms that are available in education technology companies that are making content available, a lot more is available today than it used to be in the past. I think on equality and women's rights, I think there is a progress to be done. There is a awareness that is now there, but there is a lot more distance to cover as a country for us. I mean, some of it is just historical, and we've had a certain cultural setting in which people have had certain beliefs, and then that has to change over a period of time. It's happening. It's all happening.
What about education? I mean, is that effectively going to go online, do you think?
Yeah. Look, COVID has really shaken things up a little bit. India particularly had a pretty harsh first wave, second wave, particularly the second wave, which meant for over almost 24 months, kids were not in school, right? So that really pushed people into saying, how do you adopt online education? And some schools did a good job of it, some schools didn't, but it's become abundantly clear that you have to have the infrastructure for doing online education and so on. I think the future is probably somewhat kind of a combination of what we call omni-channel or phygital or whatever. So, you have some things that will happen online, and then some things that need to be done offline, because you also need the setting of a peer group and social setting for people to learn from each other and so on. So we think it'll be a combination, and the companies that are doing a good job are actually trying to do both together.
How do you see the future for your neighbours, like Pakistan and Bangladesh?
They all have the same opportunity that we have over time.
Are they going to take it, do you think?
I'm no expert on geopolitical things, but I would say, the fundamental DNA is somewhat similar.
I mean, do you
We are
invest
focused
in Pakistan?
We don't invest in Pakistan at this point. We've made maybe one investment in Bangladesh so far. It's not a core part of our business. India is our mandate and Southeast Asia. And we probably do more in Middle East first before we go into some of those geographies. It's also about ease of doing business for companies expanding into the region and so on.
And what about here, the Middle East, doing business here?
Yeah.
A lot of people from here saying great potential here.
Yeah,
Do you agree?
Yeah. So it's a very interesting market because what you have here is somewhat per capita GDP that are matching the Western worlds or mimicking the Western world. So reasonably high per capita GDP. At the same time, you have labor costs, which is not like the West. So in fact, some of the businesses we see here, for example, food delivery, one of the most profitable markets anywhere in the world is in this region, right? And that's coming from the fact that the average order values of a delivery when you go eat outside, it's as much as in the West, but your cost structures are somewhat similar. I wouldn't say to the East, but midway between West and East, right? So what that means is the profit pools here are quite reasonable for that. So we think there are, interesting business to be built in the region. The challenge, of course, is that this region is not one unit, it's divided into multiple countries, and sometimes it's not easy for companies to go from one region to another and so on. So those are the things to be figured out over a period of time. But some examples have already emerged where people have been able to do it. Kareem is a good example of a company that's gone across the region. More people want to follow in the footsteps. And if they're able to do that, then you have, between these multiple countries, a reasonable large economy for you to build large companies.
And geopolitically, do you think region is stabilizing now?
Again, no expert on geopolitics, but I would say there is some kind of a healthy competition from a business perspective, where each region wants to become the center of gravity for startups and technology companies and so on, which is in a way good. But what we have to balance that out is to not create these boundaries and walls, so that companies from the region can actually move around and build for the region, because you do need that scale across the region for you to build valuable companies. Especially if you want to attract capital, most investors will look to see whether the companies of scale can be built. And if you end up having companies in silos, you're building for UAE, you're building for Saudi, you're building for Egypt, then none of these companies are likely to have significant scale for investors to be interested in. So to that extent, what you want to see is really a full region and companies that are regional, at least, if not global.
I mean, you made the point that data is expensive here and cheap in India. Why is that?
The oligopolistic markets, in some of these, at least I can speak for UAE, where I am, and the two telecom players dominate the market. And so, there is pricing power with the providers. In India, you've had many more licenses, and over a period of time that's gotten consolidated, but because there was competition, the prices were driven down. Especially Reliance Jio, which came as a late entrant to the market, really just slashed prices, and they came with the latest technology, and were able to offer prices that were quite unheard of at that point, and everybody had to match and follow suit. So it's all about enabling somewhat free markets over a period of time.
And in your work, your experience at Sequoia, are you competing with China all the time?
Our business is focused on India. The comparisons are not avoidable in the sense that, India and China are two humongous markets, both have high growth trajectories and so on. So there's always a comparison, particularly sitting in India.
There is a sort of psychological rivalry, isn't there, between India and China?
Well, it's more, I would say, you see what's happened in China and say, okay, you know what, maybe there is a version of India at some point which will look like China in terms of how humongous these companies have become. And so it's a friendly reminder to us saying, look, what is possible, right? At the same time, of course, structures are different and so on. So not everything will play out the same way. But that said, we always look at the West and increasingly at China to say, hey, which are the big companies that have been built and what is the potential for companies like that. So yeah, to that extent, over a period of time, of course, what we realized is every country is unique and different. You got to build for that country. And India, today.
I mean, India is a very big country,
exactly,
and therefore it has choice on its alliances.
Exactly. So we've seen India produce companies, startups that are worth 40 billion, 50 billion, 20 billion, and so on. So now the examples are inside the country.
And unicorns as well.
Definitely, several unicorns and so on. I mean, we are not as obsessed about unicorns because valuation is kind of somewhat transitionary. Last year was great, this year is less good. Things will move around. But the fundamental, can you build companies of scale, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue over a period of time? We are starting to see that happen within the portfolio and outside. So we think the outlook is quite promising. Lots of things we have to do better as a country to enable, easier business, etc. But I think things are trending in the right direction. We have a government which is very friendly towards businesses and trying to do the right thing.
It's also a government which is very much trying to balance between East and West. Your parent company is American, if you like. Do you think you can do that in the end?
Look, again, so in India, in general, people have tried to keep a balance, right? So you don't really take sides and so on. The way we see it from a business perspective, our relationships are good with the US. So a lot of US companies are in India. Indian companies are able to, especially software companies, are able to go to the US and sell their products and so on. So that corridor is becoming active. We think over a period of time, India has the opportunity to build for the world, especially software products, because we have this density of talent in India. And what's happened in the world.
And biotech as well.
Well, biotech is a new thing for us. I wouldn't say we yet have the critical mass of companies for that to be a field that really dramatically grows in the near term. But we are starting to see some signs of companies come up and so on. And once you have a hub of companies, once you have the first 3 or 4 successful companies and more people step out of that, which is what we saw for internet and mobile era, etc., where companies of scale are built, then people step out from that. You hear about the PayPal mafia, but there is a Flipkart mafia in India. There are companies, like that, which have built large companies. People stepped out and started companies from there again. So we're likely to see that in every field, right? Biotech being one as well. I'd say a little bit further out, but definitely something that we think has humongous potential for at least the Asian population that we represent.
Final question, your ambitions for the next decade?
We continue to want to be the partner of choice for some of the most spectacular founders that will come up. We think of ourselves as helping the daring build legendary companies. So hopefully we'll keep seeing these legendary companies and we can be the choice partner for them when they start out. And we think of ourselves as going from idea to IPO and beyond. We have fund structures that allow us to go very early and to also hold companies even after they go public. We want to continue to be the partner of choice for some of these legendary businesses that are being built. That continues to be the ambition.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In these turbulent times, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe to ThinkPod for more insight and analysis.